In 2007, a Kazakh economist named Dmitriy Dey was sitting at his desk, scrolling through Google Earth, zooming in and out of the empty grasslands of northern Kazakhstan, looking for pyramids, looking for anything. And then, somewhere in the Turgai region, about 430 miles below the orbit of the International Space Station, he noticed something that stopped him cold. A perfect square. Not a building, not a road. A massive geometric shape made of 101 raised mounds of earth, stretching 287 meters on each side, longer than an aircraft carrier, with two diagonal lines crossing through the center like a giant X, and it was completely invisible from the ground. He zoomed out, and there were more. Crosses, rings, swastikas, hundreds of enormous symbols, carved into the steppe across an area the size of Colorado, some of them up to 400 meters wide. No one had ever documented them. No archaeologist had ever studied them. And the oldest of these formations may date back 8,000 years, making them potentially older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and thousands of years older than the Nazca Lines of Peru. This is the story of the Steppe Geoglyphs of Kazakhstan, and what they suggest about human civilization might change everything we think we know. To understand why this discovery is so staggering, you first need to understand where these symbols are. The Turgai Trough is a geological depression that runs roughly north to south across northern Kazakhstan for about 600 kilometers. It sits on the Turgai Plateau, at elevations around 200 meters above sea level, wedged between the West Siberian Plain and the Turan Plain. 100 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period, this land was bisected by a strait connecting what is now the Mediterranean to the Arctic Ocean. Today, it is one of the most remote stretches of steppe on Earth. If you stood in the center of the Turgai region, you would see nothing. Dry grass to the horizon in every direction. Wind, constant, howling, bitter wind. Temperatures that swing from minus 52 degrees Celsius in winter to over 40 in summer. Annual rainfall barely touches 300 millimeters. The soil is dark chestnut clay, hard and cracked in summer, frozen solid for months. There are no cities for 100 kilometers, no hills to break the view, no trees, just flat, relentless earth stretching into the sky. And hidden in that emptiness, hidden for millennia, are at least 260 colossal geometric shapes that someone somehow built by hand. If you enjoy deep dive documentaries like this every week, make sure to subscribe, because what comes next is going to challenge everything the textbooks say about nomadic civilizations. When Dmitriy Dey first published his findings, nobody listened. He was an economist, not an archaeologist. He had no funding, no academic backing, no institutional support. But Dey was relentless. He launched the Turgai Discovery Project the same year, and over the next 16 years, he and a growing team of archaeologists and scientists conducted nearly 80 ground expeditions into some of the most inhospitable terrain in Central Asia. By 2023, they had confirmed and registered 127 giant structures in the project database, with the total number of known formations exceeding 260. The shapes they found were staggering. The first and largest structure, now known as the Ushtugai Square, sits about 15 kilometers east of the tiny village of Ushtugai, at an altitude of 197 meters above sea level. It is a perfect square with two diagonals crossing through it, a geometry that would be unremarkable on a sheet of paper, but at this scale, it defies comprehension. Each side of the square measures between 272 and 287 meters. The diagonal stretches over 400 meters. The entire figure is composed of 101 individual earthen mounds, each one roughly 10 to 12 meters in diameter and originally standing 2 to 3 meters tall, though millennia of weathering have worn them down to about 1 meter. The figure covers 8 hectares, the equivalent of roughly 11 football fields, 101 mounds, an odd number. Researchers have noted that odd numbers carry deep symbolic meaning across many ancient cultures. The opposition of male and female, heavenly and earthly, life and death. It may be a coincidence, or it may be evidence of a symbolic system far more complex than anything attributed to the Neolithic peoples of this region. About 112 meters from the northwest corner of the square, 3 additional rings sit along the diagonal, each 19 meters in diameter. A separate mound, 18 meters across, was found nearby. If these features are connected to the square itself, and researchers believe they are, the entire structure extends approximately 650 meters from end to end. That is longer than 6 football fields laid end to end, and it is completely invisible to anyone standing beside it. The Turgai Square was just the beginning. To the south, near the town of Urpek, Dey's team identified the Turgai Triketra, a massive 3-armed swastika-like formation stretching across 512 meters of steppe. Unlike the square, the Triketra combines swastikas, straight lines, and raised embankments in a construction pattern unlike anything else in the region. The individual mounds here look like natural hillocks, so perfectly integrated into the landscape that no one, not in centuries of habitation, ever recognized them as man-made. Then came the Bestamsko ring, a giant circle composed of dozens of smaller circles. The large Ashutasti cross, a cruciform arrangement of 38 mounds extending 436 meters across. The Ekadin cross, the Koga cross, the Shili square, each one a different shape, each one built from the same materials, earth, clay, and in at least one case, timber. Each one ranging from 90 to over 400 meters in diameter, each one invisible from the ground, each one visible only from the sky. The question that haunted Dey, and soon the entire archaeological world, was devastatingly simple. Who built these, and why would anyone build symbols that could only be seen from an altitude no human being could reach? In 2014, Dey presented his findings at the 20th annual meeting of the European Archaeological Association in Istanbul. The response was immediate. The discovery became an overnight international sensation, covered by outlets from the New York Times to El País, from Business Insider to the French science publication Numerama. Even NASA took notice. The space agency directed its satellite contractor, Digital Globe, to capture the first high-resolution orbital images of the formations. NASA's senior biospheric scientist, Compton J. Tucker, was quoted as saying he found the structures remarkable, unlike anything he had seen before. The agency even asked astronauts aboard the International Space Station to photograph the Turgai region during their orbital passes. For the first time in human history, these 8,000-year-old symbols were being seen from exactly the vantage point they seemed designed for: space. The dating of the geoglyphs is where the story becomes truly unsettling. Radiocarbon analysis of soil samples and nearby materials suggests that some of the formations may be as old as 8,000 years, placing their construction firmly in the Neolithic period, around 6000 BCE. If that date holds, these structures predate the Nazca Lines of Peru by more than 5,000 years. The Nazca Lines were created between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE. The Steppe Geoglyphs would be older than Stonehenge by approximately 3,000 years, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza by roughly 3,500 years. They would be among the oldest known large-scale earthworks ever constructed by human beings, anywhere on the planet. But here is where it gets complicated. Not all researchers agree on the dating. Some archaeologists, including Irina Shevnina and Andrew Logvin of Kostanay University, have suggested that certain geoglyphs may date to the early Iron Age, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Other studies date some structures to less than 1,000 years. The dating remains an active and contentious area of research. Dey and the Turgai discovery team have pushed to test a working hypothesis that the earliest geoglyphs appeared approximately 9,000 years ago, though as of 2023, funding limitations have prevented conclusive results. What no one disputes is this: even the most conservative estimates place these structures thousands of years before any comparable earthworks in the region, and they were built in a place where, according to conventional archaeology, nobody should have been building anything permanent at all. The mainstream explanation centers on the Mohenjo culture, a Neolithic people who flourished in the Turgai steppe between approximately 7000 BCE and 5000 BCE. Dey's team found circumstantial evidence linking the culture to the oldest geoglyphs, pottery shards, spear points, and traces of a settlement estimated at 6,000 taust to 10,000 years old, discovered near the Turgai square. The Mohenjo were nomads, hunters and gatherers who followed game across the steppe, setting up temporary camps, then moving on. That is what makes this discovery so deeply paradoxical. These structures, each one requiring the excavation, transport, and precise placement of hundreds of tons of earth and clay, would have taken enormous coordinated labor. The mounds were originally 2 to 3 meters high and up to 12 meters in diameter. Multiplied by 101 mounds for a single square, the volume of earth moved is staggering. This is not the work of a passing hunting party. This is organized construction on a monumental scale. Persis B. Clarkson, an archaeologist at the University of Winnipeg who studied Dey's satellite imagery, wrote that the Kazakhstan geoglyphs have caused archaeologists to deeply rethink the nature and timing of sophisticated large-scale human organization as something that predates settled and civilized societies. In other words, the idea that nomads couldn't build monuments may be one of the biggest blind spots in the history of archaeology. But if the Mohenjo built them, why? What purpose could these colossal shapes possibly serve for people who had no aircraft, no towers, no way of ever seeing their own creation from the one perspective that makes it legible? Dey and the Turgai discovery team proposed a compelling theory. The geoglyphs were solar observatories, horizontal calendars carved into the earth, designed to track the movement of the rising sun across the horizon. For a nomadic culture whose survival depended entirely on knowing when animal herds would migrate, when seasons would change, and when to move camp, an accurate solar calendar would not be a luxury. It would be a matter of life and death. Scientists from Kostanay University offered a parallel hypothesis. The geoglyphs were cult structures or sanctuaries, ritual sites used by early nomadic peoples for ceremonial purposes. This would explain why excavations of the mounds themselves have yielded no artifacts, no bones, no trade goods, no genetic material. These were not graves. They were not settlements. They were something else entirely. The construction technique itself presents another layer of mystery. The Turgai geoglyphs are what researchers call positive geoglyphs, built by piling material up rather than carving channels into the ground. The Nazca Lines, by contrast, are negative geoglyphs, created by removing the top layer of reddish pebbles to reveal lighter ground beneath. The Kazakhstan builders hauled earth, clay, and in at least one case timber, shaping each mound individually and arranging them with geometric precision across hundreds of meters. And they did this without surveying tools, without written plans, without any known system of architectural measurement. Consider the precision. The Turgai square's sides differ by only about 15 meters across a span of nearly 300. The diagonals intersect with mathematical accuracy. The mounds are evenly spaced. This is not random piling of dirt. This is engineering. And no one can fully explain how a Neolithic nomadic culture, with nothing more than stone tools and human labor, achieved it. There is another detail that rarely gets mentioned, and it might be the most haunting of all. These formations sit in a region that stretches across roughly 285,600 square kilometers. That is an area larger than the entire United Kingdom, and scattered across it, at irregular intervals, are at least 260 confirmed structures, with Dey suspecting hundreds more remain undiscovered. This is not a single monument. It is a landscape-scale project spanning thousands of years and hundreds of kilometers. Whatever the builders were doing, they were doing it across generations, across vast distances, with a consistency of design that implies shared knowledge, shared intention, and shared purpose over millennia. Two of the geoglyphs, the Turgai square and the Turgai triquetra, have since been included in Kazakhstan's list of sacred objects of national importance. 72 others are protected by the state. But despite international attention and NASA's involvement, the site remains chronically underfunded. As of 2023, comprehensive excavation has been conducted at only a handful of structures. Thousands of square kilometers of steppe have never been systematically surveyed. The symbols on the ground are waiting. They have been waiting for 8,000 years, and we have barely begun to read them. Here is what we know. Sometime in the deep Neolithic past, possibly 8,000 years ago, possibly 9,000, groups of people in what is now northern Kazakhstan began building enormous geometric shapes out of earth and clay. Squares, crosses, rings, swastikas, structures spanning hundreds of meters, requiring the organized labor of potentially hundreds of people, placed with mathematical precision across one of the most desolate landscapes on the planet. These builders left behind no written records, no inscriptions, no burials, no artifacts within the structures themselves. They built symbols that could never be seen from the ground, only from the sky. And then they vanished into the silence of the steppe. Conventional history tells us that nomadic peoples were incapable of monumental construction, that permanent architecture required permanent settlement, that the steppe cultures of Central Asia were simple, transient, living at the mercy of the land. But the Turgai geoglyphs tell a different story. They speak of a civilization, or perhaps many civilizations, across thousands of years, with the organizational capacity, the mathematical knowledge, and the spiritual drive to reshape the very surface of the earth into messages for something above them. Whether those messages were meant for the sun, for the gods, or for a perspective we cannot yet imagine, the fact remains that they are there. They have always been there. And until a man with a laptop and a passion for looking at the ground from 430 miles up happened to notice, the entire modern world had no idea. What else is out there, carved into landscapes we have walked across for centuries without ever thinking to look up or down? If this story made you rethink what you thought you knew about ancient civilizations, drop a like and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Subscribe to Uncharted Mysteries so you don't miss the next deep dive. We release new documentaries every week. And as always, until next time, stay curious.